You know, after all these years, I only come to the pulpit when I have something to usually tape on the pulpit, right? I don't usually preach from here, and I have my roll of tape, so it should be good. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, Christ is in our midst. Today for me is a very exciting day because it's the feast day of St. John Chrysostom, who is one of the saints in the church that we see his name on the cover of every Divine Liturgy book. But there's some great, great things about St. John that I want to share with you today. And first of all, I wanted to tell you a little bit about his background of his life, but there's some extraordinary things that I think in today's day and age that we lose sight of. And when we think of St. John, we just think it's the liturgy of St. John, but we lose sight that the fact is his relics and his life after death even was very miraculous. So St. John, as we know, composed the Divine Liturgy, which we celebrate almost every Sunday. He wrote numerous sermons, well over 1,000 sermons. And when I say wrote sermons, he wrote them out. And now I know sometimes people complain about the length of a sermon from the priest. I've heard people say to me every once in a while, Father, it was good, but it would have been nice if you could have done that in 6 minutes instead of 9 minutes or whatever it is, which is the case. But St. John used to preach for hours, so consider yourself very lucky. But the writings of the church that he had, he wrote not only his sermons, but he also wrote on the Gospels, explaining the Gospels, and also explaining the life, or not the life, but the letters of St. Paul himself. Now, his mother, Anthusa, is also commemorated today as well. So she, having a divine life as well, is commemorated as a saint today. So St. John was very well taught. He was very well educated. He was taught in rhetoric. He was taught in Greek philosophy, and also how to write, how to speak, and everything related with communication. And his teacher, who was a pagan, was not a Christian, said at the time of the teacher's death, as he was dying, he said, if I could only hand on my teachings to John, but we lost him. That's what he said. We lost John to the Christians. Now you think about it. I mean, that's the teacher who taught him so much about everything, how to write, how to read, how to speak, how to be this great orator in the church. And he says we lost him, and that his greatest failure for this teacher was the fact that St. John became a Christian. Now, as St. John was writing and as he had moved up the ranks of the clergy, he became the Patriarch of Constantinople, which is very familiar to us that we know about the Patriarch in Constantinople. But he was, one of the prayers that he had was, as I write, now you could just figure St. John, as I write, I really want to understand the mindset of St. Paul. So all the letters that we have, all the writings and the explanations of St. Paul that we have, the ones that are very quality writings are written by St. John. And the prayer that St. John had was, please, Lord, give me the ability to write these explanations on these very difficult letters. If you've ever picked up the Bible and flipped to the back part right before Revelation, which everybody kind of finds very fascinating, but if you go a little bit before that, you'll start running into these letters, and the letters are read from the chanter on Sundays in every Divine Liturgy. So he had this prayer, and as he had this prayer, he was starting to begin his writings. And there was a man in the town where he was who went against the emperor. And he spoke out against the emperor. And in those days, if you spoke out against the emperor, it's not like today where you can just have a rally against whatever you want in life. But then the emperor said, you are going against me. He confiscated all his possessions, and he set him up for execution. So this man came to St. John, and as he first went to speak to him, he said, I need to talk to you because I know that you can convince the emperor not to kill me. And St. John said, I'm busy right now. Come back tonight, and I'll be more than glad to talk to you and work out whatever's going on. Now, his St. John's helper, his priest helper, was named Proclus, and he also became a saint too, which we commemorate on November 20th, which is exactly 1 week after today. So Proclus in the evening is there, and St. John is in his room, and everyone had to go through this Proclus in order to get to the patriarch. So it was kind of like his secretary outside the door. So this man comes later in the evening to see St. John, and he says, the patriarch said to come later in the evening to speak to him, and Proclus said, yes, he asked me to welcome you in at the time of your arrival. So Proclus goes to the door, and he sees the door of St. John's office is closed. So he's like, well, that's strange, because he didn't have anybody in here. So he leans down, and he looks through the keyhole. Now, keyholes in today's day and age, probably some of the kids don't even know what a keyhole is. But back in the day, it was a hole. You could see straight through the door, and you put the key in from either side, and you could lock the door. So he looks through, and he sees this man, this balding man, leaning over St. John and speaking in his ear, and St. John kind of nodding and listening and writing down what this man is saying. So Proclus goes back to this man who's waiting to see him, and he says, there's someone in there. I don't know how he got in there, but there's somebody in there, and do you want to wait a little bit until the man comes out? So this other man says, sure, I'll wait. I need to talk to him, otherwise I'm going to be executed. Proclus goes back a little bit later, sees the man is still in there. He looks through the keyhole again and sees the man talking to him. And this goes through the night. The man finally says, I'll come back tomorrow and speak to him. I didn't know he had somebody tonight. Maybe he forgot, and I'll come back tomorrow. So the man comes back tomorrow. Proclus is outside, and he says, I know he's available because no one has gone in. Proclus goes again. The door is closed a little bit. He looks around the door, and now he sees this man in there again. And he's like, where is this guy coming from? What is he? And he's talking to St. John again in his ear. He's leaning right over his ear, talking in his ear. This happened for multiple days. And then finally, Proclus sees St. John in the liturgy, and he says, who is this man that keeps talking to you? And he says, what man are you talking about? I just think St. John says, what are you talking about? And he said, there's this balding man who's leaning over your ear, and he's speaking in your ear, and he's been there for the past few nights. And St. John says, what does he look like? And he says, he's bald, he's got a long beard. St. John says, come here a second. Pulls him over to the icon of St. Paul and says, does he look like this man? Which St. Paul is right up there. You can kind of point the one on the right, correct? On the icon. And he says, does he look like this? And he said, yes, he does look like that. And St. John says, thank God. That is the answer to my prayer. Because those nights that you came to my office, I was writing and asking that St. Paul would guide me in explaining these epistles. Now, the scholars of the church, the fathers, the saints of the church, have said over and over, St. Paul himself could not explain the epistles better than St. John Chrysostom. And this is what I want to show you. This is what I'm going to tape up here. Is this icon right here. I know it's small, so I couldn't figure it. We got a new copier. I couldn't make it a 11 by 17. So this is St. Paul leaning over and speaking to St. John in his ear. And you see St. Proclus over here in the doorway, kind of peeking around the curtain, speaking, seeing this happen. But St. John said that was the answer to my prayer, that St. Paul himself would come to me and explain the epistles to me. Now, here's where it gets really cool, if you will. St. John died, and he was born in the mid-5th century, so 440s, around there. As he was, later in his life, there was this empress, the one who was the wife of the one that was going to kill that man, of the emperor. she had it out for St. John. For whatever reason, she didn't like him, and she exiled him a few times in his life. When he was exiled out, he died by the guards who beat him and treated him awful as he was being exiled. But one of the, as he was being exiled on the first time, he came to this bishop's house, who was an Arabian bishop. Adeltius is his name. And he went to his home, and after St. John died, his body was not taken back to Constantinople. And this bishop said, where is he? He was praying, where is John, my blessed teacher, my holy guide? Where did he go? And this bishop, had a dream at night that he was taken by an angel into heaven. And he said the dream was so real that he didn't know if it was a dream. He didn't know if he went there in body, in spirit, if he had actually died. But he had this vision of him going into heaven with this angel. And the angel is showing him all these different saints and pointing them out by name. And the bishop, Adeltius, says, where is John, my teacher? And he says, quote, this is from the words of the angel, no man who is still in the flesh can see him, for he is at God's throne with the cherubim and the seraphim. In other words, St. John is in a place higher than most of the saints, but in a place where the mortal man, the one who is still alive, is unable to see him. So his relics, so he's exiled by this Evdokia. He goes out, and his body is buried on the outside, but the Evdokia, after she did this and after he died, started having all these problems. She started having multiple illnesses. Her body was like dying on the inside. In fact, it's described that as she was sick, that worms were coming out of her wounds, which is very nasty to hear. But that's what happened to her. And when she dies, her tomb shook. And it shook for 34 years. And people knew that something was wrong. They knew that she was against St. John, and they knew that she had suffered this terrible death. But when they went to bury her, they saw that her tomb was shaking. And in the only time that her tomb stopped shaking was when St. John was brought back to Constantinople. When he was re-entered into Constantinople, his relics were brought back, then her tomb stopped shaking. Contemporary day. Let's talk about this. In 2007, St. John's skull was taken to Cyprus. Now, St. John's skull is in a monastery called Vatopedi in Greece on Mount Athos. But there's something very unique about his skull that we really need to know this. And the point of this is that his skull, as we see the normal skull of a person, he's over 1,600 years old, this skull. His skull has no skin on it, except for one thing. And I'm going to put this out now, which is right here. This is a reliquary for his skull. But do you see that little trap door there? Now, for those who have hawk eyes, you might be able to see what's in there. But his ear is incorrupt. The ear that St. Paul himself spoke in. So everything else on his body decayed. It's just bones. In fact, his bones, the remaining part of his bones that were taken by the church in the West were gifted back along with St. Gregory to the Patriarchate a few years ago. But his skull has no other skin, has no nose, no nothing, except for his ear. So you think about it. St. Paul spoke in his ear. What's the only thing left on him is his ear. But in 2007, his relics were taken to Cyprus. And there was multiple miracles that were happening from his relics. But one of the things that was amazing that people noted over and over and over when his relics visited Cyprus was two things. Number one, the fragrance, the aroma that was coming from the reliquary. And number two was that his ear was warm. It was the temperature of the body. and many people who were deathly ill and had multiple problems were healed. And it was written about over and over that miraculous trip from coming from Athos to Cyprus was a time for great glory for God and through his beloved St. John. Now, St. John, like I said, was a beautiful writer. There's plenty of books written by him. And today, if you look in your pew back, in your little slot, you'll see a piece of paper folded. Hopefully it's there still. Now, we all know have heard the Epistle on Love, where love conquers all things by St. Paul. But why I printed this out for you is this is from a book that I have. And this book has the writing of St. Paul on the top, and then a very brief explanation on the bottom of the epistle. So now you too have a writing, an explanation from the hand of St. John, knowing this story, knowing the unbelievable beauty of St. Paul speaking in his ear, the amazing incorruption of his ear, and to remember that this saint is not, he's not someone that just simply wrote the liturgy. So if you were to go to Mount Athos, the men who are able to go, if you had ever gone to that monastery, you are able to go and see and venerate the skull of St. John and see his ear, a 1,600-year-old ear that is attached to his skull, the ear that St. Paul himself spoke in. So I tell you this today because this is one of the great and amazing stories, true stories of the church and the blessed St. John. Now, where's St. John in the church? Because somebody would probably ask me, so I have to pull out my flashlight now, and we got to go back here. Oop. This icon in the very back on the top. Oop. On the back on the top, he is, I believe, the one in the middle. So that is the three hierarchs icon, and that's where he is in our church, looking over us. So read this later, or you can read it now, or many of you are probably reading it now, but take it home with you and keep it with you, and realize, too, that any questions you have about the church and about the epistles of St. John, even the Gospels, you can find in the writings of St. Paul, you can find in the writings of St. John. May he continue to bless us, and for all of us who are named John in the church, I would consider this one of your other feast days. So you're named after St. John the Baptist, 99% of the Orthodox who are named John, but then you have St. John of San Francisco, you have St. John of Kronstadt, you have St. John of the Russian, you have, there's St. John's, a lot of St. John's, but St. John today on November 13th is one truly that you should learn about and remember and tell the story of his ear and the beauty of St. Paul speaking to him, giving us these gems of understanding, these gems of knowledge and explanation on the epistles and the Gospels, which for many of us are very difficult to understand. May he continue to bless each and every one of us. Amen.